Hi, Super Scholars, it's Miss Gross. Today we are working on lesson 15-3. Now I'm skipping straight over our solve and share and the workbook stuff today and going straight into the problems on the practice buddy because I think that doing it this way will help you see some examples of what you're actually going to be doing, as well as show you how to work one of the tools that we'll be using with this today to help us. We are going to start measuring angles. So the way we're going to start doing this at first is comparing it to benchmark things that we already know. So when I say benchmark things that I know, I want you to think back to fractions. Okay, when we called something a benchmark number, we usually said it was something like 1/2. And we could compare our fractions to 1/2 because we knew what half of something was. Well, that's kind of what we're going to do today. And we're going to compare or see if we can figure out the measurement of an angle based off of what we know about shapes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start. Now, your practice buddy will be different than mine. This is why when you all come on for help and we say, well, everybody's numbers are different, or it might be my number 5, but it's your number 8. The practice buddy changes for each person. Okay, so just because I'm on a question doesn't mean it'll be the same number or the same shape as yours. Okay, so just because this is the way I'm answering them doesn't mean that I'm going through and just giving you these answers. So don't try to just put in the answers that we go over together because you'll probably end up getting them wrong. Okay, so I want to clarify that ahead of time. So when we look at these, it says find the measure of the angle. Use pattern blocks to help. Well, you don't have pattern blocks. If we were at school, we would have those fun little blocks that are in all those different colors to help us. But we're not at school. We're at home. So that's what makes this a little bit more difficult. But we do have virtual ones. Okay, and that is what I'm going to show you. This website is linked with cool math games. Okay, so it's cool math for kids, and it has pattern blocks on here that you can use to help you with these. Okay, this is also something that's really fun just to play around. I want to show you how to work it before I get into this. So you'll see different pattern blocks up here at the top. If I click on them, I can change their color. So this one is blue. Say I don't feel like making it blue, I want it to be green. You can change their colors. Okay. There is also puzzles. If you want to go on here after you finish your work and try to do these puzzles, okay, you can try to match the pictures with the pattern blocks, okay, and get your artistic self in there with these, okay. So that is something you can do. Now, say you put this on here and you don't like it, well, you can start over. Say clear work and start over. So you might be saying, well, Miss Gross, how is this going to help me figure out the measure of an angle? Well, typically, these might not be exactly the same because they're virtual, but they'll be pretty close to what we have. A protractor is something that we're going to be learning about how to use in the upcoming lessons, but I'm going to give you an idea now. So I'm going to click the protractor. A protractor is a tool that we use. You'll see them at school. They don't usually have this big circle. We usually have half protractors, so they look like a little half moon. Okay, so I have my protractor and say I want to know how much a square would measure. So I'm going to grab my square and I'm going to put it to where it lines up with these lines on this protractor. This one is at 0 and that's where we want it to stay. So we're going to line up this aqua colored line on the dark blue line of the protractor to where the bottom is, okay? And you can either have your square in the front, or if you click your protractor, it'll move your protractor to the front. I like it to where my protractor's in the front because then I can move it around and I can see it, okay? So, but when you click on the square, it'll move it again. So I'm gonna make sure it's lined up totally on that blue line there, okay? If when you click off of it, there's some white space, that's okay, but you wanna get it as close to that line as you possibly can. Okay, so knowing how to use my protractor, I also wanna make sure that I have it lined up here so that both of these dark blue lines are on the edges of that shape. So I can see that a square has a 90-degree angle, okay? We know that a 90-degree angle is called a right angle. All squares will have a right angle. So if you see an angle that looks like it's a square, then you know that it's 90 degrees, okay? That's how we're going to benchmark these. So if I look at this shape, I want to turn it using these arrows to where one of my sides will be flat on this line, okay? Now, I can see that I have the bottom lined up, but my top isn't quite lined up, and I'm going to turn it a little bit because I'm not perfectly straight there, okay? So I can see I have my bottom straight, but my top is not laying on that line. So I'm going to drag this top one to match it. Okay, you always want to move the top one. You don't want to move this 0, okay? And you want to get it until where it is lined up on here. So this shape, I don't want to see any of that teal. That'll tell me that I'm perfectly in line. Oh, I think I've got it. This shape has a 40-degree angle. You can see it is a much smaller angle than what I have of a square. Okay, so if the angle is smaller than a square, you know it's going to have to be less than 90 degrees. If it's bigger than a square, then we know it's going to be more than 90 degrees. Let's use this trapezoid, for example. Okay, I want to look at my trapezoid, and I don't want to look at this bottom angle. I want to look at the top one. So instead, I'm going to spin my trapezoid around until it's upside down, maybe. Until it's upside down, and I want to match this angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the bottom flat on here again, and then I want to line up this one. So I've got to pull it out a little bit so that I can get it lined up the way I need it to be. Okay, perfect. All right, and so I can see that this one, I've probably got it off just a little bit, it's probably 120 degrees, is bigger than this square because that angle is wider. You can see it goes out further than the square would. If I put the square on top, I can see that angle goes out way farther than my 90. Okay, so we're going to use these benchmarks of what we know is 90 degrees, 120 degrees, and 30 or 40 degrees. These are probably closer to 30, but this shape is a little large. Okay, so we also know that a straight line is 180 degrees. That makes a straight line. So those are the benchmarks we want to work on as we're looking at our practice buddy today. So let me see. Let me find which of my tabs I have here. Okay, so find the measure of the angle. Use pattern blocks to help. So you can flip back I'm going to go ahead and close these out so I don't get confused as I'm helping you all. So we're going to go back to this one and we're going to look. Which of these shapes is closest to this angle? You're right, the tan one. So was that tan one more or less than 90 degrees? Less, you're right, because this is smaller than a square. A square would be shooting straight up. Okay, so when I look at my options, I can see it's not 180, it's not 120, it could be 30, because that's less than 90, not 150, could be 60, or it could be 90. Okay, or we know it's not 90, sorry. So do we think it's 60 or 30 degrees? Well, when we looked at this one, we said this was 40. So looking back at this, I'm going to say that's pretty close to that shape. So I'm going to guess that it's 30 degrees. You're using what you know to see. So I'm going to check my answer. Oh, look, we got it. Let's move on to another one. Find the measure of the angle. Use pattern blocks to help. What does this shape look like to you? You are right. If I finished it off with my not great art skills, it would be a square. So this one is a square. We could use that square pattern block to help us. And what do we know about a square? It is what degree? 90. Great job. Maybe it's thinking. All right. So now we want to find the measure of the angle, and it should have erased for me, but it didn't. So let's get that out of our way. Okay, so find the measure of the angle. We're going to use our pattern blocks again to help. Looking at this little angle here, is that more or less than 90? When we just looked at, is it more or less than a square? You're right, it is less. So using what we know about our pattern blocks, we know that it can't be 90. It's got to be smaller. Can't be 150. Can't be 180. Could be 60. Could be 30. Or could be 120. Okay, so we just did one that was 30 degrees. Is this as small as this one? No, it's a little bit larger. Not quite a square, but larger. So based off of that, I know that it's going to be 60 degrees. Okay, let's look at one more here. This one, when I look at it, is it smaller or larger than a square? You are right, it is larger than a square. If I look at this, it's wider than a square. I couldn't make a perfect square on that. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to look at this. Whoops, wrong one. Sorry, guys. I'm going to look at this and I'm going to think, okay, it's really close to these pattern blocks. And if I remember correctly, it was 120 degrees for this one. Let's double check what we learned. Yes, so 120 degrees for our trapezoid here. So when I go back and I look at this, do you think that that's 120, 180, or 150? Now let's think about what we know about a straight line. How many degrees is a straight line? Yes, thinking back, it's 180. So we know it's not 180. So that narrows it down to 120 or 150. Does this shape look like it's closer to a square or closer to a straight line? I agree. It looks like it's closer to a square. So that would mean you would want to get it closer to 90 than 180. So I'm going to pick 120. And we're right. Okay, so I'm not going to continue on with the rest of them, but you should get questions that are similar to these. These pattern blocks, you can move and change and start over as you need to manipulate them. You can compare them to each other, just like we did. We used our trapezoid and we put our square over top of it to see that this angle was much wider than our square. We could also then put this one over top of it and see that our square angle is much wider than our rhombus over here. Okay, so use these to play around and help you when you are on here. These will also be linked with the video on our slides so that you can get to them, okay? All right, let us know if you need any help, Super Scholars.